Back again for Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast. I'm your host, CJ Baumgartner. How you guys doing? You can find the Bombs Away podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. To get a hold of this thing, be sure to give it a 5-star review, like the videos on YouTube, hit the bell, subscribe, all that cliche stuff. Because we're going to talk Minnesota Twins baseball. We're now into the full swing of spring training baseball games. And of course, now new things are developing. We are beyond the best shape of his life season, and we're beyond the kind of everybody's glad to be back season, and now we're into the overreactions of spring training season maybe. And I think there's a couple things that we'll touch on later in the podcast. I think overall we'll try and hit on talking about just some news and notes throughout this week in Twins spring training. We'll also hit up our conversations of the future of the Twins infield for 2023 and maybe even potentially the future. So let's start off with some of those news and notes from Twins spring training. Starting off with the first one here is Balazovic getting sent down to AAA camp. And I got to say, based on it came a couple days after the stories were printed, after the first day, Balazovic got to speak to the media and kind of explain. Basically, he said he was sucker punched and said he was just like, he didn't provoke any fight. Some guy just came up and punched him in the face. And look, I honestly, weirdly, I can believe that because look, you've heard the stories in Florida. Like, is it some crazy guy at a bar at midnight all of a sudden just sucker punching you in the face, especially at a bar, like some crazy drunk Florida guy? Be more, I would be less shocked if the person wasn't naked. You know what I mean? Like, just based on some of those stories that you always hear. And I could definitely see his train of thought. I could see his line of, hey, man, some guy just came up and sucker punched me and there's nothing I could do about it. Now, if you're the Twins, they still came down pretty hard. And I got to think that Balazovic tried to relay his side of the story before the Twins spoke to the media. And I got to say, either the Twins don't believe him or the Twins are saying, hey, man, I understand, but it's the day before spring training and you're out at a bar. Like, what are we doing here? It's not like, oh, you get a night off, nothing going on tomorrow. It's, you got to go to work in the morning. I mean, if you come into work and you're like, hey man, I can't work today, got socked in the face, my jaw's wired shut, boss, I can't do it, I was out at a bar last night. And they're like, okay, well, like, I get it, it's not exactly your fault, but why are you putting yourself in that position? And that the Twins probably is the most logical train of thought of where we're at in this whole debacle. Anyways, it's not good for Balazovic because he's now down to AAA camp already. And you got to think it's just, we don't even want to deal with you. And not in a bad way, 100%. It's more of just we need to worry about these other guys. And it's kind of the, I'm not even mad, I'm disappointed aspect with Balazovic, I think, at this point, because he still can be a good pitcher. I'm not trying to rule him out. I'm not trying to say he's a bad dude. I'm just, he's a guy who made a mistake, but at the same time, he's a guy who made a mistake at a very bad time for his career because the Twins aren't, maybe they've gone from being mad to just straight up being disappointed in Balazovic because they have other options now. Balazovic was one of the Twins' top pitching prospects last year, and now, I mean, he's got Louis Varland in front of him, Bailey Ober's in front of him, Josh Winder's in front of him, Simeon Woods Richardson is in front of him, and all four of those guys aren't scheduled to be on the opening day starting rotation. Balazovic is behind a bunch of guys, and now he's behind even getting a chance to prove why he was a top pitching prospect with the Twins after having an ERA of over 7 last year. So, long story short, I think it's just more of a, it's like when your teacher tells you they're not mad at you, they're just disappointed. And I think that's what the sending Balazovic down is like. It's not a punishment. I don't think it's to punish him, but it's just like, man, we just don't have a reason. We don't have a reason to care about you as much as we did last year. And not that they don't, and that they don't think he's going to be, maybe the ship has sailed, maybe the ship hasn't sailed on Balazovic. Who knows? He can still turn it around and he can still make us forget all about it. But I think it's just more of a, look, man, we got to worry about some of these other pitchers right now, and you're hurt and you haven't done anything for 10 days. So you got to, he hasn't been running, he hasn't been throwing, he hasn't been doing anything because his jaw's wired shut. So he's got to get all of a sudden back into spring training shape and then get back into shape. And he'll be down in AAA camp and he'll be through minor league camp and then maybe even start the year in extended spring training, maybe starts the year on the IL in AAA and comes back. But again, it's just a guy who did not need did not need this, and it stinks because you obviously want guys who come through your system to turn out and to be good major league players. So the story's not out on Balazovic yet. The jury's not decided, but it's just not a great step in the right direction. So the Twins sending him down to minor league camp like a day after that story, maybe it's just bad timing. Maybe it's just a coincidence, or maybe it was just kind of like, get out of here, man. We got a big league team to worry about, and you don't show any signs of being close to the big league team right now. And that's not on a lack of effort at this point because your jaw is broken. So like you, as much as you want to, you can't, and there's so many guys in front of you. Anyway, so that's the Balazovic story for a while, the news and notes on that. Another thing is the injuries that we're going to have to start to worry about here. We knew it was going to come because it's spring training. I mean, it's just like in training camp. Every once in a while, a guy's going to tweak something and they'll just want to keep it on the back burner. They'll not want to try and push things too much because the whole point is to get ready for the regular season. So you want to ramp everybody up and increase their workload. At the same time, you don't want to work them too hard, or if somebody shows a subtle sign of an injury, you want to take care of it right away and just get it done. So that way you don't have to worry about it anymore. Or you just know that this is the time of year where you can rest and you can be uber conservative with some of these injuries and let them nurse and let them figure things out. And that's kind of started to trickle down here with the Twins. So first off, Jose Miranda had some shoulder soreness, and apparently it's serious enough to keep him out of the World Baseball Classic. Now, the soreness hasn't kept him from playing. He played in the Twins spring training game against Pittsburgh and hit 2 home runs in that game. Not the game that was televised on Bally today, or the Twins broadcasted on the radio, but it was their away game. I don't know where the Pirates play, but they were playing Pittsburgh on the road, and Miranda hit 2 home runs in that game. So it's not like it's affected his hitting too much, but it's more affecting his ability to play third base, and that is a serious question that the Twins are going to have to consider. You don't want to pigeonhole Jose Miranda into being the DH because you want to give him a fair shake at third base, but at the same time, you know, if he ends up playing more DH than third base at the beginning of the year, and instead of Solano DHing, he's playing third, or instead of Farmer DHing, he's playing third, or instead of, whatever, you figure it out as the lineup shuffles. But that's an interesting one. Again, don't overreact into any of these injuries that we're going to talk about. There's a few of them. We're not trying to overreact to them. We're just saying what's happening and how it can impact the Twins right now. Jose Miranda still looks like he can hit, so that's a good sign. It's just more of this guy needs to be a third baseman for at least the first half of the year until Royce Lewis comes back. You need him for at least that long, potentially more, depending on how that comeback is, or maybe Brooks Lee shows up. He's been having a good camp as well. But if you're Miranda, you want to be playing third base. You want to be out in the field. You want to be doing all that stuff. You made the concerted effort to be a better fielder in the offseason and to train and be a better hitter and everything. So it'd be a poor sign if Miranda ends up playing a lot more DH than third base throughout the first half of the season, because it probably means that the Twins don't view him as the long-term third baseman, which isn't the end of the world for Miranda. It's not like he can't have a productive big league career, but it's just not a great sign that they give him this one assignment and right away it's already proving that it's not great. Like Miguel Sano in right field is a very extreme case. I'm not trying to say Miranda's like that in any way, but anyway, with Miranda, I think it's just whatever. He's skipping the World Baseball Classic. I'm sure the Twins, once they realized there was any slight injury risk, not that they thought he was going to get hurt long term, but in terms of the World Baseball Classic, I think they just like it if their guys were here and training in Fort Myers with the team instead of being away. And I actually thought the World Baseball Classic would be a good experience for Miranda and would have allowed him to be with some of these really, really good baseball players. And especially, I mean, Carlos Correa is there and there's the connection, obviously, but Correa wasn't able to go. So having Miranda go and kind of being that liaison and having Correa come back and kind of build that bond, I'm sure that a lot of those guys already have, but just to be able to do that and to spend time around very good baseball players from PR would have been very good for him. But it is what it is. I also think him getting more fast-paced and live speed at bats would help his progression. But also at the same time, if this is a guy who broke down towards the end of the season last year, adding those extra real games right before the regular season also might not be ideal either. So it's a little bit of give and take in that situation, but they'll figure it out. And I think it's not the end of the world that Jose Miranda is skipping. At the same time, kind of stinks for him getting to have that experience. So Gilberto Celestino is probably the biggest injury on this list. He's out 6 to 8 weeks following a thumb surgery that he had. And for Celestino, it just stinks for a lot of the same reasons that Blažević does, because Celestino didn't quite have the pedigree that Blažević did through the minors in terms of like, this is a guy who's a top prospect, not just in our system, but a top 100 prospect in baseball. Celestino wasn't quite that. Remember, he came over, I believe, in the Ryan Presley trade. So he came over from Houston's organization, spent a couple of years in the Twins minor leagues before getting called up early in 2021. He was a very, very young player. And I mean, he's still only like 24, 25 years old. So in terms of big league players, he's very young to already have had 2 seasons worth of experience. He got called up out of pure necessity because they didn't have anybody that could play center field the last couple of years in a large amount of games. And he just proved not to be ready because he couldn't handle big league hitting and big league pitching. I mean, and he really never had a chance to hit high minor league pitching because he had a very low experience amount in Double-A. Didn't really play a ton of Triple-A. I think he got called up in 2021 right from Double-A and didn't have a ton of time to cook in Triple-A because they just needed him at the big league level to play center field. And can he hit ninth and just get on base once a game? Like, that's all they really required of him. And again, awesome that he got to get up to the big leagues, but at the same time, he didn't get a chance to go through and get those minor league reps and work your way through and develop the proper way. So he kind of has to backfill it. And it just stinks for Celestino that he's going to miss the early part of this of the season. Now, the minor league season starts, I think, in April. The major league season technically starts at the end of this month. So, I mean, again, he's not going to miss the whole season. And if he rehabs right and does all the right things, it won't really be that big of a deal. But it just kind of stinks for him in terms of the way that it does for Blažević, in that you can't get those reps in spring training and acclimate yourself and really take as much advantage of this time to build up and get ready for a season. And he'll have to get thrown into it because it's a thumb. You can't really do much with your swing when your thumb hurts or when you're trying to rest your thumb. So we'll see what Celestino can do when he comes back, but they don't really have to worry about him. The Twins do from a major league perspective because they have Michael A. Taylor, and we'll touch on that in a second when we talk about our next injury. But the last bit on Celestino is that it was also a good time for him to just cook and get some more at-bats in AAA. We talk about how Larnach and Kirilloff, Trevor Larnach, Alex Kirilloff, don't really need a ton of at-bats in AAA anymore. They've kind of proven that they know how to hit AAA pitching, and Celestino just probably needs a few more of those AAA at-bats just to get himself back up to speed. Anyway, so let's talk about the last injury that I have here on the notes, and that is Nick Gordon. He had a high ankle sprain, took him out of a game last week. Rocco said, everything looked positive, and then today they got confirmation. I think this is from the Star Tribune, that there's no structural damage, that he just rolled his ankle pretty bad, and he'll just have to ice it up, wait till everything feels good, and he can be back out there. That's good for Nick Gordon, and it's good for the Twins that he'll be okay, because Nick Gordon will see himself, especially if Larnach doesn't make the roster. Gordon being a lefty who can play the corner outfield spots, he'll get a lot of play, especially against righties, but Nick Gordon will have a chance to kind of nestle out a little role for himself, especially coming off the year he had last season in the second half where his hitting did start to uptick a little bit. There's a home for Gordon, and there's a nice little role for him. So good news on his part that there's no structural damage. Then looks like he's on track to start the season with the Twins, not on the injured list, and they can just slow cook him. There's no reason to throw him back into the fire, give him a whole week off of game action, and just let him rest up. When he's ready, then he can hit the ground running again. But I think it just goes to show that the Twins are kind of flexing their depth a little bit. And I remember, this is so stupid. When I wrote for Zone Coverage, one of my very first articles, like one of the first 10, was the Twins when Alex Kirilloff didn't get called up with the big league team. It's like, well, the Twins feel like they have the depth to do it. And I mean, not that I completely rescind my take, but at the same time, it's laughable to compare it to where it's at now, where the Twins actually do have legitimate major league depth and not Kyle Garlick being the reason Alex Kirilloff couldn't have been on the opening day roster. Either way, I just think that the Twins really do have some good depth right now with this team. And I think that overall it's going to benefit them throughout the season, but more so it just kind of helps them not panic in spring training. Because after last season when everybody got hurt, if they wouldn't have added all that extra depth, they just would have ran it back and said, that's fluky. Like, that's not going to happen to us again next year. And then the slightest injury happens and everybody would start freaking out. But they haven't been freaking out because they have Michael A. Taylor. So if Celestino's out, there's no reason to be worried because Celestino wasn't planning to get a bunch of major league time anyways. If Celestino was getting a bunch of major league starts, especially in the first half of 2023, it means something has gone wrong. That Buxton is not only hurt, but also so is Michael A. Taylor, and there's just no option. And also now Joey Gallo can play some center field too. So it'd have to mean that all three of those guys are either hurt or playing poorly enough that it doesn't allow them to get into the lineup as veterans. So it's just good. It's a good thing to have Michael A. Taylor on this team and flesh out that I've talked about this before, and especially when the Twins first got Taylor, that I thought Celestino had the capability when he gets some more at-bats to be a Byron Buxton light, a guy who's not obviously at the talent level of Byron, but somebody who, could at least mimic some of the things he does, play a decent center field and have a little bit of speed to use on the base paths and a little bit, whatever. Celestino didn't prove to be quite a good base runner, but he has the pure speed if he just gets a little bit more experience and a little bit more if they round out that base running ability a little bit, obviously a step down from Byron, maybe even two, but at the same time could do just enough things to where you could still have him in the lineup when Buxton is either hurt or resting. And I think Michael A. Taylor fits that. He's a veteran version of Celestino, and that will help out the Twins dramatically this season, having him on that roster because he's the veteran version of Celestino, a guy who will back up Byron Buxton a bunch, can do some base running, play a good center field. I mean, legitimately, Michael A. Taylor's a Gold Glover, so that helps. And then when you talk about the injuries on the infield with Jose Miranda, we already mentioned it. If Miranda can't go on third base on opening day, if the Twins just have to DH him, which the DH spot is open for Miranda to take, I'm sure the Twins wouldn't be upset if Miranda ends up if Miranda ends up getting time at DH for non-injury reasons. Like, I don't think that's either way. I think they have the depth because they have Kyle Farmer who can play there. They have Donovan Solano who can play there. And they have as well Nick Gordon who can play second base in terms of shifting a couple other guys around. But I mean, you see it. Polanco is taking a slow spring. I don't think that's a bad thing on Polanco. I think the Twins are just taking their time with him. They're also taking their time with Byron Buxton. He hasn't played yet this spring in game action, but like they're obviously doing their workouts in practice and behind the scenes and whatnot. But the Twins have the depth to be able to shuffle some guys around, and they didn't have that depth 2 years ago. They certainly didn't have that depth last season, and they're able to use it. And for now, it's not in big league action. Now your depth goes as good as, it's okay, Byron Buxton's out for a month, but we have Michael A. Taylor, and it's like, right, yeah, Michael A. Taylor is good, but not great, and we gotta kind of work with that a little bit, or it's like, don't worry, Jorge Polanco's out, but we have Donovan Solano, and it's like, well, obviously Polanco's better than Solano. That's why Polanco's the incumbent starting second baseman, and Solano's going to be a super utility guy. Doesn't mean that anybody's a particularly awful player, but at the same time, it just means that you still don't want to have to flex your depth. You actually want to use your starters and you want to use your main guys. But I think it helps the Twins not panic in spring training, and it just helps them go, okay, all right, well, you rest up. We have this guy who's ready to go. So you take your time. And if, maybe you're going to miss the first week of the season, just get healthy, come back. There's no need to rush you. Whereas, maybe last year or 2 years ago, there's the need of, okay, well, we could keep Celestino on the big league roster and have him be behind Buxton. And, Buxton's the knees feeling a little weird. We're going to want to just maybe play Celestino a little bit more this week. And all of a sudden, that's just not a recipe for success. So, good on the Twins for addressing that depth, and we've talked about it before on this podcast, but now you kind of see it come to light. It could all mean nothing in the regular season, as we just talked about, but still good on them for addressing it, and now we can move on, and we don't have to worry about that as big of a deal, at least in spring training. If we get to the big league season and things aren't quite happening, then that's not good either. And just as I mentioned, by the way, this injury stuff with the Twins, I'm just reading a story here from Aaron Gleeman of The Athletic, and Austin Martin has been shut down with a sprained UCL. Not good. It is currently unknown what Martin's timetable for return looks like. According to, I'm reading this article from baseball trade rumors. It's currently unknown what Martin's timetable for return looks like. UCL sprains are common precursors to Tommy John surgery. And just talk about a blow to a prospect. Austin Martin was once considered the Twins' top prospect, or at least right behind Royce Lewis. And for him to have as poor of a season as he did last year, and then for him, if he has to miss all of this year, just, oh, man, that stinks. So we'll see what happens with Austin Martin. It's more serious for pitchers than position players, obviously, because pitchers need to use their elbow more. Martin was, of course, in the Jose Barrios trade, had a season he wants to forget last year. The Twins tried to get his swing for a little bit more power, didn't quite work. Austin Martin's more of a contact hitter. The Twins wanted him just to see if they could bump up the power numbers a little bit. It didn't quite work. And then when he started to play a little bit more towards his style of play, you started seeing the average come up and the on-base percentage come up. So it was trending in the right direction, and Austin Martin was a guy who definitely, we talk about the depth. If Jose Miranda needs to go on the IL, you could see the Twins calling up Austin Martin and playing in this situation. So it's unknown. It's what Martin is going to do, but we'll have to see, because the Twins do have some options right now. If you look, if a guy goes, if Miranda gets hurt and the Twins have to call somebody up, if Nick Gordon can't start the year with the big league team, Trevor Larnach and or Alex Kirilloff will just take those spots. Or if you look at Brooks Lee, who's having himself a great first week, a great first impression in big league camp. I mean, everybody's just gushing over Brooks Lee right now, to the point where people are talking about, like, is he going to be on the opening day roster? That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but you get my point of that. Brooks Lee he made a really good first impression last year, and guys who come out of college can do that because they've already had the experience. They're older, they're stronger, they're wiser. Like, they've just played more baseball. They've seen more live pitching. They've seen all this kind of stuff. And so now they get into the professional leagues, and if they're proven to be ready, and Brooks Lee he played at Cal Poly, and his dad was the head coach at Cal Poly. So he's a guy who's seen a lot of baseball, knows a lot of baseball, and just this progression for him is just coming very naturally, and that's a very good sign. He'll start the year likely in AA, maybe in AAA, but if you're in AA, the Twins have called up Celestino from AA before when he wasn't ready, and if Brooks Lee ends up crushing AA pitching there, and all of a sudden Polanco has to miss 2 months or whatever, or Miranda has to miss some time, or anybody, there's a good case to call up Brooks Lee to the big league roster. I mean, might as well, and try and progress, get him, like the Twins did with Royce Lewis. Hey, it's only going to be for 10 days, but let's get you that big league taste. Let's motivate you a little bit. Let's see what you got. Let's excite the fan base. Let's get you some experience up here with these guys, and then we'll send you back down, and then we'll see how you do. And Brooks Lee is a guy who could do that. So, and especially with Austin Martin going down, that's going to open up some spots. Austin Martin, probably more of a second baseman, center field, third base kind of player. So Brooks Lee just strictly an infielder. But at the same time, the Twins will have a glut if Royce Lewis comes back healthy. If you have Brooks Lee, Royce Lewis, Solano, Farmer, Correa, Miranda, Kirilloff if healthy. I mean, again, the Twins have so many what ifs, and we've talked about this on the podcast. They've had so many what ifs on this roster, or maybe ifs is the right word. If Buxton stays healthy, and if Pablo Lopez continues how well he played last year, and if Joe Ryan takes another step up, and if Jose Miranda takes another step up, and if Carlos Correa hits better with runners in scoring position, and if the Twins steal more bases, and if they play, there's just so many ifs with this team. If Trevor Larnach proves he's healthy and plays consistently, if Alex Kirilloff is healthy and plays consistently, there's a lot of ifs that the Twins haven't been able to prove. But if they do, this team can be really good. Really good. Winning the Central, good. I don't know about winning 100 games, good, but they could be a 90-plus win ball club if they play up to their potential. There's a lot of good hitting. And the Twins' rotation is above average enough in 1 through 5 to be able to put themselves in a really good spot. So there's a lot to like about this Twins team. if they play well, and that depth that they have with major league guys in front of them, with the Solanos and with the Taylors and with the Farmers, it may prove to be redundant when we get to August. But I think if all of those guys on the roster is redundant, I think it means the Twins have had a very, very successful season. If it's redundant to have Kyle Farmer because Brooks Lee and Royce Lewis are tearing it up at the big league level, awesome. If Donovan Solano's redundant because Alex Kirilloff and Joey Gallo are splitting time at first base. If Joey Gallo has a turnaround season, that's another if for the Twins. So, I mean, there's a lot of ifs on this team, but that being said, and they have a lot of gluts. They could potentially have a lot of gluts in terms of positional depth, but I think if we're talking about that, if we're saying that it's time to cut Solano because the Twins have so many other options, the other young guys are proving themselves, that's a good thing. So I think it's rather you have that be the issue rather than, oh man, this guy's not ready. It sure would have been nice if there's a veteran to just kind of backfill and we're not having to replace one guy with we're not having to replace one underwhelming prospect with another prospect who could potentially underwhelm. So we'll see. Now, I think that's covering the spring training news and notes. The Austin Martin angle threw another wrinkle into our discussion. Literally just got the notification as I was scrolling through. I'm not sure when Gleeman tweeted it out or wrote about it. I'm guessing sometime today, but that was at least the story that flashed across my feed in the MLB Trade Rumors app, which I think is a fun app to follow if you're not on Twitter. But my guess is since that this came out pretty quick, they're usually pretty quick when things like that happen. And yeah, so anyway, let's take a look at the infield in our positional rankings. We've gone through starting pitching, relief pitching, catchers, and now we get on to the infield. And let's take a look at the infield. And I think it's a good thing to remember with the Twins, and now that we really get into the weeds of the position players, that it's really important to remember where the Twins are at in this situation. Because they're Tampa Bay light. I think that's always, you got to remember, whatever Tampa Bay is doing, the Twins are trying to either do it straight up or have their own twist on an idea that they're already doing. So the Twins are Tampa Bay light. Derek Falvey and Thad Levine, they don't really have a ton of connections themselves to Tampa, but they hire a lot of people from Tampa's front office. Rocco Baldelli is a Joe Madden guy coming from, he was Tampa Bay's bench coach, or he was either like base coach, quality control coach. He was working in the Tampa Bay Rays organization before the Twins brought him in as manager. So they really love what Tampa does, and they try to mimic that and put their own twist on it. So why does that matter for the infielders? I think it matters because the Twins look at the Tampa Bay Rays lineup. It's just 26 guys and 13 guys on the lineup side who it's a mix and match. It is. And it's not necessarily a bad or good thing, but that's just how they choose to play baseball. The Dodgers kind of do this to an extent, by the way, too. They have guys who it's like, well, this guy isn't hitting very well, so we're just going to have this guy play third base for now. Or, we have this prospect coming up, and this guy normally has played shortstop, this other guy who's the incumbent, but let's slide him over to this position. Like that, and throughout the season, that's not even a consistent position change. It's, you're going to get some starts at shortstop. You're also going to get some starts at third, and you'll play a little bit of second base. And hey, if we need you, we might have to throw you at first as well. And there's and it ties into the depth, having multiple guys who can play multiple positions. It also ties into stackpiling positions and being able to be flexible through your lineup with matchups against lefties, righties, against a certain pitcher, riding the hot hand. The Twins do it a little bit with the catcher in terms of kind of the split that they do of like a 60-40 split with riding the hot hand at times and all that. So the Twins will have Carlos Correa at shortstop, Jorge Polanco at second base, and really everything else is kind of up in the air. So let's take a look at the Twins in the infield. Jorge Polanco's the dude at second base for the time being. One of the Twins' best pure hitters in my mind, one of the most consistently productive hitters since becoming a full-time starter in 2017. So Jorge Polanco, a nice addition for he's a nice piece on this Twins team, always has been. I think he could be a leadoff man for the Twins in some regards. He's had a lot of leadoff at-bats logged already over the last couple seasons. Not a ginormous number, but healthy enough to where you could see the Twins giving that to him full time. devil's advocate argument could be said that they only give him the small amount because they don't quite trust him there. But I think when you have Byron Buxton and Luis Rise in front of you, you typically don't get a ton of those leadoff. You don't typically get put in the leadoff spot in the lineup very often. He didn't have a great last season, especially the end, and that's more because of the knee issue. But Polanco is a productive player. I trust Polanco that when healthy can be a really, really nice hitter for the Twins. He could be entering his final year with Minnesota. His contract ends after this season, at least according to Spotrac. And because it was a 5-year deal, remember, he signed right before the 2019 season. So you think 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023 fills up those 5 years. The Twins bought out the rest of his arbitration and basically gave him that advanced payday. I think it's been a good deal for both sides in terms of that contract. Polanco got his payday expedited while also the Twins getting the security. Polanco and Kepler, remember, signing those 5-year deals, because as much as we talk about Kepler potentially being in his final year with the Twins, Jorge Polanco could be in that boat, and not necessarily for the same reason that the Twins are underwhelmed with Polanco, but it might just be because there's just so many different young guys on this roster that Polanco just might not be worth paying to keep around, because you have Brooks Lee and you have Royce Lewis and you have Austin Martin if he can get up here, and you also have Jose Miranda at third base. I mean, you could convince yourself of a Twins lineup with Carlos Correa at shortstop or third base, Brooks Lee, Royce Lewis, and then Alex Kirilloff at first base. You could also put Miranda at first base as well. But the point is that there's a lot of depth, and I think the Twins do envision that Brooks Lee, Royce Lewis, Carlos Correa infield. Now, where all those guys stack up will depend on where we're at, because Correa, in 3 years could be moving to third base, but at the same time, it's a really good spot for the Twins to be in. Now, maybe they bring Polanco back on a 1-year extension or something if they feel like they're not quite ready to do that yet. But based on how Brooks Lee has been progressing, and depending on what happens with Royce Lewis, don't quite know if that will happen. But with the Twins infield and with Polanco, I think Polanco probably wants a multi-year deal if he gets onto the market, and he'll get suitors. I mean, if Polanco hits the open market, he will be a starter somewhere. I'm very confident in that. So this could potentially be our last year of Jorge Polanco. So enjoy him, because he's been a very productive, a very nice hitter for the Twins. One of my underrated favorite Twins, a guy who doesn't quite light everything up, but all of a sudden you look and he's just consistently producing for this Twins team. So good job, Georgie Polanco. And that's kind of where things are at with him. If he's healthy, he's a good hitter. And if he's not healthy and things kind of get weird, he could potentially be on his way out the door anyways. But for 2023, pencil him in as the opening day second baseman. He should get a majority, if not pretty much all the time there. Jose Miranda profiles better as a third baseman than a first baseman. We talked about that already, but hey, give him a shot, especially with the shoulder issues. Could be a DH more. We've already talked about Miranda and his positional situations and other podcasts, so go check that out on all the platforms. Nick Gordon, again, another guy we mentioned, could get some time. Super utility, could, depending on if Larnach doesn't make the Twins opening day roster. You could see Nick Gordon used more as a corner outfielder than an infielder, especially against righties. But Nick Gordon is a utility guy who could play himself into some more consistent time, and not consistently at one position, but just work his way into like a Luis Ariz, where it's like, well, one day you're just going to have, like, we just need you in the lineup, so you're just going to have to play left field. I'm sorry, whoever, you're getting the day off kind of a deal. No Larnach could mean he's the go-to lefty corner outfielder, as we just mentioned. Again, if he develops and takes another step further than he did at the end of last season, or at least continues that production, he could nestle himself into a nice little role. He's out of big league options, and he's too good to sneak into the minors. So he's going to be on this Twins team for better or worse, and we'll have to see what happens with Nick Gordon in that respect. For Kyle Farmer, again, another one of the super utility guys, team control for next season. So the Twins would like to have him around. And again, if Polanco gets weird and if Polanco gets weird, or even if Polanco plays well enough to where, the Twins don't quite feel comfortable with putting Brooks Lee or Royce Lewis at second base, but they, still want somebody there, you could also see Kyle Farmer filling that role in 2024 of just like, hey man, you're a veteran, hold down the fort. You've been here. We kind of seen you. That's more looking into next year. But for this year, Kyle Farmer's a guy who could play every position but pitcher and catcher, right? Actually, I think Kyle Farmer even played a little bit of catcher. very briefly. So he's like a backup emergency third catcher for this Twins team. So he's somebody who could play a lot. He's somebody who could also not play a ton. Again, as we've talked about before in this podcast, Kyle Farmer's your opening day shortstop is not great. It's not good, but at the same time, it's not downright atrocious. You're not putting Pedro Florimon out there, but also you could just do a lot better for a starting caliber player. But Kyle Farmer is a super utility guy and a guy who will get a lot of at-bats in a lot of games, but just no true positional home, is a very nice player to add on to this Twins team. And it's the same way as well with Donovan Solano, 1 year depth rental, going to see a lot of time at first base if Alex Kirilloff isn't ready to go, and we've already seen him getting some time in spring training games. I think he was penciled in today at second base for the Twins, but has also seen some time at first base. Really, he's just going to go wherever the Twins need him to, and he's basically he's like a diet Luis Ariz, an older diet Luis Ariz, at his best. So we'll see what happens, especially with a kind of shorter stature guy playing first base, because the Twins just kind of need him to. So we could see that potentially happen as well. Royce Lewis, second ACL, not going to come back until the All-Star break at the earliest. That's best case scenario. So when you look at Royce Lewis's 2023 future, at best, he comes back post All-Star break and nestles in maybe as a super utility player to start. And then if he proves that he's up to speed on the big league level, then you find a position for him. Or he goes into AAA and just maybe spends the rest of the year cooking there, or waits, instead of being a utility guy on the Twins, goes down to AAA to get consistent at-bats, which I could also see the Twins doing. A lot of it might just have to depend on where they're at in the standings. If the Twins are in first place and they're rolling, then they'll say, you go to AAA and let's have you cook a little bit and make sure you're ready. If the Twins are hovering around 500 or below that, or, maybe needing a spark, you could also see them throw him into the mix to try and help them out. Because Royce Lewis, whether by his personality or just how good of a ball player he was during that 12-game stretch in 2022, the Twins were a good team when he was there, and they were having fun, and it was awesome, and Royce Lewis was fun to watch. So that's something interesting. It's a good, interesting development for the Twins. And I think just Royce Lewis will get the opportunity. And I don't know, maybe the second ACL just completely washes out the good 12 games that he had. Royce Lewis didn't quite have enough time to see big league adjustments. And it's not like he lit the world on fire, but he just he didn't struggle. And he looked like he had a head above his shoulders. It's funny because Royce Lewis was there and Jose Miranda was there at the same time, and Miranda just looked lost and Lewis looked like he had it all figured out. And then all of a sudden Lewis gets hurt and Miranda has to get called back up, and Miranda proves to be a good big league hitter for the next 3 months before kind of waning a little bit at the end of the year, but still put up enough to prove that he should be considered on the big league roster. So I don't know. Maybe this is just me. I mean, I have the Twins hat on right now as we're recording this podcast. Maybe it's me being a bit of a homer, but I think Royce Lewis has the potential to come back and not miss a beat. It's me being optimistic, but from that only 12-game stretch, I'm ready to get invested, and I'm ready to say that I like what I saw, and I like the intangibles, and everything you read about Royce Lewis is good. He's just like a humble dude, just hardworking, good teammate, all that good stuff. Having Carlos Correa around him as well will be good, and him and Brooks Lee kind of being there, not to compete with each other, but to play off of each other through the minors as well is a nice development and will be good for this team long term. Willie Castro is a depth non-roster invitee who could potentially see some time. Guys like Brooks Lee, Royce Lewis, some of these guys aren't quite ready yet, but you just need a guy who can come up to the big league team and just play for a week or something. Willie Castro might be your guy. St. Paul's where he'll be though, and we'll see what happens with him. But again, if you're not quite ready to call up Brooks Lee, but you just need somebody to play for a week, Willie Castro might be the guy who gets called up. But speaking of Brooks Lee, and we'll get to Brooks Lee in a second. Willie Castro, by the way, former Tiger. So if you recognize that name, played with the Tigers a little bit. Again, a non-roster invitee. He's just there to fill a spot and be a veteran guy you have in case you don't want to call up Brooks Lee, because Brooks Lee, top 10 pick last year out of Cal Poly. Dad was the coach there. We've talked about it. He mashed pitching in Cedar Rapids. He got into Wichita and played very, very well. Likely start the season in Double-A, but it's not unreasonable to think that he could be with the Twins big league club very, very soon, and especially with how well he started in spring training. Now, how important is the numbers you put up in spring training? Almost irrelevant. Because remember when Aaron Hicks just obliterated the ball in spring training and had a very nice spring, and the Twins were clamoring opening day center fielder, and they put him in the leadoff spot, and I think he went like almost the first month without getting a hit because he wasn't ready. But everybody got so invested in the spring training. It's like when teams get invested at a wide receiver because they had a really good preseason, and then all of a sudden when it's full speed and everybody's trying their hardest, and they're like, oh yeah, you're not quite ready for this. So that's something to keep in mind with Brooks Lee. But at the same time, I think when we talk about the intangibles with Royce Lewis, I think those also exist with Brooks Lee, with the dad being the coach, the hard worker, a lot of college ball experience already. The guy's a lot of baseball wisdom. Maybe wisdom isn't the right word, but just a lot of baseball knowledge. And that should really help out his development and help to kind of speed run his process a little bit for Brooks Lee. I mean, there's a good chance he's on this Twins team sooner rather than later, but we'll see. They might want to slow cook him as well, just because they have the ability to, and they can pull him up only when they feel like he truly is ready and not just because they need a spark or need something. Ed Julian, 23 years old, Canadian-born guy, went to college at Auburn. He's got some pop in his bat as a lefty. Couldn't make the big leagues this year, but will start in the high minors, Double or Triple-A. Only 2 years of minor league ball, so you could see him use some more seasoning. I know there's a lot of Twins fans and writers and people who think that he could be on the opening day roster if, let's say, Nick Gordon got hurt and Miranda wasn't quite ready to go. There was a case you could make for Ed Julian being on that team, and maybe he still does. I'm not trying to write it off and say he sucks or anything. But Eduardo Julian is a guy who can play a lot of infield spots, likely a second baseman, though, really long term, but can play all around the infield. Doesn't have a ton of high minors experience, but again, he also played college ball at Auburn, so it's been a little fast tracked. Didn't finish out. He didn't play all 4 years at Auburn like Trevor Larnach did. He left college early, so that's not quite an apples to oranges comparison in terms of playing college ball, but it is more than just coming out of high school and not getting a lot of high minors experience. So he's seen a lot of pitching, and he's a guy who could be called up and make some plays and make some starts for the Twins. What does that role look like for him this year, though? I don't quite know with Julian, because he's also a guy who gets thrown into that infield mix. And with the Brooks Lees and the Royce Lewises and the Jorge Polancos and the Carlos Correas, and the Kyle Farmers and the Donovan Solanos, where does he fit in? And it means that if Eduardo Julian is getting a lot of play at the big league level, it means that either something's gone horribly wrong and a bunch of people are hurt, or it means that he really is playing well and that all of those concerns about how does he fit don't really matter because he's playing well at the moment and you'll ride the hot hand. So Julian is a guy who could make some plays, more of a kind of a slash hitter, but also has a little bit of pop in that bat out of the left-handed side. The Twins love them some left-handed position players, don't they? Left-handed hitting position players, don't they? On this team. Some other guys down the pipe in the minor leagues, Noah Miller, a 20-year-old single-A player on the Twins top 40 prospect list. He's a switch hitter whose big brother is Owen Miller, who plays for the Guardians. Just a little bit of connection there. Noah Miller's a slashing contact. He's a slashing kind of contact hitter. Not really a ton of power, but has a 348 on base percentage in Fort Myers. Doesn't quite mean a ton because he still has to progress through high A, double A, triple A for even getting close. He's a guy who's going to cook for at least the next 2 to 3 seasons before we really start to get invested in Noah Miller. Danny DeAndre, international signing with a right-handed swing, still very raw at 18 years old, so not much can be said about him yet for the Twins organization. Michael Hellman, a righty who can play second or third base, with some outfield as well. He had an 860 OPS, fell down over 100 points from AA to AAA last year, but at 26, because he hit an OPS of the 950s, and then it dropped to 860, which is still a nice number in AAA, but you got to assume that if he gets to the big league level, that also could drop again. as well. But at 26 years old, it's kind of another one of those guys like a Matt Wallner, like a Larnick, like a, even some of these other prospects we talk about where it's like, how much time do they need to cook and how much is it you need to just get up here and prove if you can play or not? It's kind of the case with Nick Gordon after a while. It's like, this guy just needs to get up here. We just need to be able to figure out if he could play. Like I get that he doesn't quite have a home, but we just need to get him up here and see what happens. So Michael Hellman is a guy, 26 years old. It might be time to start looking into that as well, especially since he'll have some options and you can kind of send him up and down. He could crack the big league roster at some point. He's a contact, not a big power guy. And at the same time, if there hasn't really been a ton of twin steam on him, then he'll have to really, really have a good year in AAA for anybody to quite get behind it. But just keep an eye out on the name Michael Hellman. Jake Rucker, third first baseman, profiles as a super utility guy in the pros, can play second or outfield too. Seems like a year or two away from the Twins because he's at 23 years old. He can cook in AA, but again, he struggled in AAA. No AA experience. So what I mean by that is he can cook in AA because he played really well in single A, got moved up to AAA, didn't get a ton of time in AA to really figure that out. So now if he gets some more at bats and can develop, we'll see how that progresses for him. Kanoe Cavaco, probably butchered that last name, so I apologize. First round pick in 2019. He's a shortstop who moved to third full time last year, as most shortstop prospects do. They never actually stay shortstops. Very raw, 21 years old, so he needs some time to still develop. Hasn't made it to AA yet, so not quite ready to jump on that one and get on the bandwagon, but at the same time, another name to watch out for in the Twins system. Again, there's no clear path, and I could say that it's going to be Miranda, Correa, Polanco, Kirilloff, or Solano, but it's going to rotate so much that how often will those core guys all start? Almost never. Almost it'll be at least consistently in 1 week. There'll almost be some kind of, at the end of the year, they'll consistently get a ton of time together. But in terms of like back-to-back time, they're always going to be a little bit of a variations, depending on who they're playing, depending on who's available, depending on all of these factors that the Twins like to do when they make the lineup combinations. So ultimately, I think that it is kind of the core. Is Alex Kirilloff ready? Means if the answer is yes, he's the opening day first baseman. If he's not quite ready and he has to start the year maybe on the IL or an extended spring training, or maybe if he's going to start the season, but more as a utility guy on the bench, then Solano's the opening day first baseman. And I think that's how your infield looks. I think Carlos Correa, he's Carlos Correa. He's a shortstop. He's the opening day shortstop. He's going to be a third baseman in a few years, but just overall, he made just an absolutely great play today, fielding a two-hopper deep in the hole as shortstop and just firing it over to first base. Carlos Correa, I think this guy can stick. I think I put something out on Twitter to that effect. So this has been Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast. We have more great Twins content coming up as we get closer and closer to the regular season. It's the 5th of March upon recording this, and I'm just so excited for the big league season to get here. It's going to happen at the end of the month. That being said, World Baseball Classic coming up should be really fun to watch as well. I just want to watch live baseball games. I've been watching spring training games and they're fun, but at the same time, they're spring training games. They can only go so far. And there's one note, actually, as I was about to wrap up this podcast, there's one thing that I haven't quite talked about, and that's kind of been the story throughout this week. So I think it's important that we talk about it, but I also want to make sure we got in the Twins injury news and notes and some other stuff. And then also finally got over the infield positions before we take a look at center field and the corner outfielders as we progress our way through spring training. So one last news and note I want to touch on. And the reason I kind of held off on this is because it's just a big talking point of the Twins got to watching the Twins games. I got to see their big league team counter the pitch clock and how they react. And you could see Carlos Correa in his first at bat. Everybody's made a big point of this, got out of the box, started to kind of take a couple cuts and started to twirl around a little bit. And then the umpire's like, hey man, you got to get back in the box. And you can see him go, oh, and then get back in there and get ready. And then the next pitch, he doesn't even bother with it. And then in the interview in the dugout after the at bat with the Twins radio crew, Correa is just like, yeah, that's the rules. We have to play within the rules. Here we go. Like, this is how it is. I'm not complaining. We just have to be better at it. Correa's got a little bit of that Boy Scout in him. It's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not trying to make fun of him, but he's just kind of that, hey man, those are the rules, got to respect the rules. This is how we got to play by, which is fine because it is. And I think you see a lot of people talking about the pitch clock, and we mentioned it a little bit last week, so I don't want to dive too much into it, but getting to watch a game with the pitch clock, I've just heard the numbers and I've heard people talk about it since other teams have been doing it. But now that I finally get to consistently watch the Twins play with a pitch clock, I think it's fine. It's fine. The viewing experience of the game has not changed. I am not constantly worried about the pitch clock. I'm not. As much as I thought I would. I was a guy who was deathly against the pitch clock, by the way. Go back to old podcasts, like maybe a year ago. Go back even to times I don't even remember if I've said this on this particular podcast, but I've just said all the time that I was very much against the pitch clock. I thought it was dumb. Thought you need to let the players police themselves. The problem is the players didn't, because you hear people talking about, oh my gosh, like this is going to speed up pitchers so much. Is it though? They're going to get hurt. I don't know how to tell you guys that pitchers, if you watch a game from not even 30 years ago, if you watch a game from 20 or even 10 years ago, this wasn't that big of a deal. If you go back to the 2005 Twins, games were not taking 4 hours because guys got in the box and they played baseball. And the baseball traditionalist in me says you shouldn't have a clock. This game should just be played without one. Everybody should know the pace. But that's also the baseball traditionalist in me, is just get in the box and play baseball. What are we doing here? Why do we need to spit out the seeds and adjust the cup and do all this kind of stuff? Why can't you just get in the box and play? And pitcher, why do you need to circle around the mound 5 times and shake everybody off and do a pickoff, do 50 pickoffs and all this stuff? What's the need for that? And that's the other baseball traditionalist in me. Trust me, I've played town ball in the past few summers, handful of summers since I've been out of high school, and love it. Great experience. You should go watch a game or be a part of it or just experience it. But at the same time, there are some guys who really like to take their time and call time and do this stuff. And there's other guys who are like, just get in the box and let's play baseball, man. And that, I think, is the other baseball purist in me that's coming out now that the pitch clock's in here. Someone's like, oh, but this is going to mess up their rhythms and it's going to figure it out. Good hitters and pitchers are already figuring out how to use it to their advantage. Max Scherzer's already figuring it out. The hitters are going to try and figure out their ways as well. I think this will benefit pitchers a little bit more than hitters in terms of the pitch clock, because the pitchers are the ones who can quick pitch a little bit. And as a hitter, that's the one thing you don't want to have happen, is getting quick pitched. And which is where you don't get a chance to get comfortable at the plate, because as soon as you get into the box, the pitcher's already starting to throw. That could be a thing to watch out for, but also if you just stay in the box the whole time, should be okay. And by the way, just figure it out. You're some of the best baseball players in the world. You don't need to have a rhythm to be good. And if you do, then you're not as good as maybe you think you are. I don't know. This is coming from a guy who stinks at playing baseball, so I can't sit here and say that. And in the same vein, come on, what are we doing here? In terms of injuries, that could be a real concern. I don't want to downplay that, because pitchers throw a lot harder than they did 30 years ago. But if we lose a couple miles on velocity, I don't think it's the end of the world. Yeah, it stinks that we might not get Duran throwing at 108 miles an hour, being a little hyperbolic, but you don't get him throwing a ton more than what he's already capable of, but he still throws hard. He still throws good. And also, if that means the ball is put in play more, that's fine. If we have a little less swinging and missing, that's okay. Don't get me wrong. I love Pitching Ninja's account. I love watching people just look like they have swords out there. But if it puts the ball in play a little bit more and makes an exciting product, that's also an avenue of the pitch clock. What it's designed to do is keep the game moving. And getting to watch some of these spring training games for the Twins and listen to them on the radio, they move along. There's a pace. They are done. The games are shorter, and the games were shorter back then because guys got in the box and played. There was not a ton of this, I need to do my rhythm and I need to do my thing. Guys just played ball. And I think that's the biggest message. If you're worried about Game 7 of the World Series being decided because of a pitch clock violation, take it in the NFL. That's like the Dallas Cowboys having their season end in the playoffs because they let the clock run out on themselves. They did not calculate. They made a mistake, and they violated the rules by not getting a playoff before the clock hit all zeros, and so they lost. And it's in the same way of, if you aren't ready for game 7 of the World Series, man, If you're not ready to play, and if you went through this whole season and you slip up at the very end, that's on you. It's on you. You've gotten to this point. You've played a ton of baseball with the pitch clock. This shouldn't be a problem. And by the way, it's the same thing in basketball. If you can't get a shot off before the shot clock and then you turn the ball over with 5 seconds to go, I'm sorry. What are we supposed to do? So there needs to be some level of enforcement on this rule to get players to actually listen to it. And it's a little harsh and it doesn't quite make sense all the time. But at the same time, this is how, in the words of Carlos Correa, these are the rules, and we got to figure out how to play within them. So pitch clock, that's my thoughts on that. And there's the last of the Twins news and notes. Talked about the infield as a whole, a long podcast. I appreciate you guys for listening for this whole thing. The plan was to break this up into 2 podcasts initially throughout the week, but as I just didn't quite get the time to sit down and record, it's just going to be one long podcast. We'll have more content coming your way as we get ready to go through spring training in the World Baseball Classic and everything that goes along with that. So for Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast, I'm CJ Baumgartner, and we'll see you guys next time.